All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me for today's session. My name is Daniel Koppers, and today I will be talking about how we decided to use large language models and different traditional AI models to help our customers with clinical trial recruiting. I won't go into too many technical details, but I will mainly focus on what our working assumption was for this project and to start this project, and what problem our customers and partners have brought to us. In the second part, we will take a look at how we decided this use case fits into an automation use case like this and how we validated our assumptions before actually building the system. And we will then finish with some impressions of the system as well as a high-level description of how we build it. But first, some legal stuff. This talk reflects my own personal views and not necessarily those of my employers or any of their related group companies. Of course, the content used in this presentation is based on personal research, and it was ensured that there's no intellectual property violations included, and all ethical guidelines I, as a PharmaLex and/or Cencora employee, am bound to and have to adhere to. All right. So with that out of the way, a quick introduction about myself. My name is Daniel Koppers. I'm currently the head of R&D at PhlexGlobal. That's a Cencora company, and I have been working in the life sciences software industry for about 17, 18 years at this point. And that is in various positions from consultant to CTO, but I have been in this position for the last 4 years at this point. And my main job is to help our business and the surrounding companies to implement new technologies and automations via RPA, and nowadays a lot of AI and large language model-based process enhancements. Maybe a quick word about Cencora, or formerly known as AmerisourceBergen, to help you put this project into a little bit of context. So Cencora is a NASDAQ-listed company, and if you Google Cencora, you probably find one of the biggest companies in America that you probably have never heard of. Cencora currently has more than 40,000 employees worldwide and is mainly a drug wholesale company. So that means we deliver medicines, veterinary and human medicines, to pharmacies, to community practices and things like that all around the world. Apart from that, we also have a brand of our own pharmacies, and we support our customers in the drug development life cycles via our services arm. So that goes from R&D up to regulatory and everything in between, including what we discussed today, clinical trial recruiting. Okay, so let's take a look at the problem that we were presented. One of the biggest problems in drug development are clinical trials. Trials get more and more complicated and more regulated. And that's not a bad thing per se, but it makes them more and more complex to start and run, and therefore more and more costly. One of the major challenges is patient recruitment. And that holds true not only for rare diseases and rare disease studies where you would expect that, but also for common diseases such as cancer and other diseases. So why is that? The team started talking to professionals and patients and started to develop a working assumption. We found that there is a clear public knowledge gap. So we found that studies show that 41% of all Americans are completely oblivious to clinical trials, as in they have no idea clinical trials are conducted or even exist. Now, that still leaves 59% that are aware, but only 4% of all Americans ever participated in a clinical trial. And another interesting statistic that seems unrelated now, but becomes a little bit clearer why this is interesting as we progress. We found that the average American sees their pharmacist around 35 times a year, while they see a doctor or specialist far less, almost an order of magnitude less. Now, the team also talked to professionals, doctors, pharmacists, community practice leaders, things like that. So the question was, why is there so little education and recruitment going on in these settings. And it turns out enlisting a patient into a clinical trial is a lot of work. There are tens of thousands of studies ongoing right now at the same time in America and around the world. And you need to find the ones that are in the right location for your patient so they can reach them. They have to focus on the right disease, obviously. Are they recruiting right now? In which phase are they? Does my patient fill all the eligibility criteria? You need to evaluate that. And there's also a lack of incentive to bring your patient into that clinical trial. So while for physicians, the time aspect was the slightly more important part, and they just couldn't spare the research time to match their patient to these studies. For pharmacists, it's not only that, it is also the lack of compensation that came with the time investment. And of course, if you enlist a patient, your job is not done. You have to have follow-up calls and follow-up visits with them, and there's a lot of aftercare after that too. Well, why does this matter? Why should we care? We all should care because a delayed or a failed trial, and by the way, 80% of trials are either delayed or completely failed because of issues in recruitment. Remember when I said starting a trial is costly? Well, failed and delayed trials cost the pharmaceutical industry billions of dollars per year. That's billions with a B. So it's fair to say that part of the high cost for medicines that we're seeing right now is driven partially by this. But on the other side of the coin, even though, and this is another statistic, even though 85% of cancer patients are treated in a community practice and could really benefit from participating in clinical trials, it could literally save their life. Only 3%, not 30, 3% are enrolled into clinical trials. And this comes down to, number one, the complex time and the complex time investment, and then also the lack of incentives we talked about earlier. Okay, so after defining the problem, we started looking at solutions. We knew pharmacists are qualified to help here as an example. We're using those as an example today, but we looked at other professionals as well. But they don't have the time nor the funds. The funds part won't be covered here today, and we found a way to compensate them for their work. But on the time part, we started thinking about giving them a system to pre-select studies for their patient, helping them to select patients and automating that selection process. So they only had to look and evaluate a handful of studies for a handful of patients rather than looking at tens of thousands. So we created a study with a select group of pharmacists. We selected a few clinical trials and manually created the data and gave them the objective to recruit. And what we found with them in this manual study was quite insightful. So in exploring innovative recruitment methods like this, we discovered that significant impact pharmacists can have. They achieved a remarkable 45% referral rate for eligible patients that they found. So it's easy to say pharmacists have set a new benchmark, really far surpassing traditional recruitment methods here with the help of the pre-processed data. Now, the success is not only about the numbers here, it's leveraging the unique trust pharmacists hold with their patients. Remember, they see their patients around 35 times a year. So our strategy of providing pre-processed data to pharmacists streamlined the recruitment process, enabling us to meet recruitment quota really in record time. And the efficiency and accuracy introduced by this approach is unparalleled, basically. But the innovation doesn't stop here. So the implications that we found with this and this success story did even get a lot deeper. The high referral rate from the pharmacists can be attributed to their intimate relationship with their customers, and we kind of expected that. But thanks to the localized nature of pharmacies, we saw an unprecedented diversity in patient recruitment. Diversity that is really needed and desperately needed in clinical trial recruitment. It is another reason for frequent delays. So again, this is far exceeding industry standards. This approach addressed and surpassed the FDA's diversity requirements, which are often a bottleneck in clinical trial timelines. The impact of this finding cannot be overstated. It really opens doors to a more inclusive and representative and ultimately more successful clinical trials. And we think that this really is a significant step towards ensuring that trials start reflecting the diversity of the population at large and give us more accurate results in the future. Now, our journey from identifying a novel use case to executing a highly successful pilot here underscores a transformative phase, we think, in clinical trial recruitment. The validation of our working theory throughout the pilot with the pharmacies not only solidifies the role of pharmacists and other recruitment methods in the process, but also sets a new standard for efficiency and inclusivity in clinical trials. Now, one thing that I want to do now is to look at how we took these learnings and put those into an actual working system. So stepping into the realm of technology now, out of the manual study into technology, we started applying large language models to tackle the initial steps in recruitment here. So this isn't about replacing human insight, but augmenting it really. By automating the sifting and understanding of complex study protocols, we're making strides in identifying what we're really looking for a patient. This technology pulls out and interprets key inclusion and exclusion criteria that need to be met by each patient, and that's the time-consuming part, in minutes rather than in hours. It's about getting the right trials to the right people faster and more accurately, and really ensuring that we're not missing out on potential participants or giving help to people that need the help. In general, we use large language models to extract and interpret the inclusion and exclusion criteria from clinical trial protocols. Again, that task is quite time-consuming, but it's also very confusing for non-experts since the criteria are very complex in a lot of cases. The model filters the relevant questions and criteria for us. They dump them down and they bring them into a further processable format, and I'll get to that in a second. We also do the same thing with patient files. Patient files usually contain the whole medical history of a patient. And if you recruit for a cancer study, as an example, you don't need to know if the patient had the flu in 2015 and has recovered. However, you need to know their current state of health and their current conditions. So with the groundwork laid by large language models, we've built an AI model that then acts like a matchmaker between patients and trials. So we have to dump down pre-processed data out of the large language models. Now, on top of that, think of it like a matching app, but for clinical trials and patient participants. This model digs through the patient files, analyzes the data against every single trial and every single trial requirement. And it's then not only looking at the surface level, but really understanding the nuances that are hidden inside both of these files and understanding each patient's situation. This process scores each patient's fit for each trial and streamlining what used to be a painstakingly long process. Our aim here is obviously to preserve the essence of personalized matching that we found earlier, but leveraging technology to do the actual heavy lifting and sifting through the data. So before I show you the system, just a quick view onto a very high-level architecture diagram, how the data flows in the background between our different models. The important factor here is scalability. We have to ensure that we can process hundreds of thousands of potential matching pairs within the system in a reasonable time frame, and elastically scale the system based on load. So both on the data management side as well as on the AI inference side. In our case, we use, and I'm Dramatically oversimplifying here, our IT architecture team could probably fill the entire presentation time talking about this at length. We're using Windows Azure to do the hosting for us, and a combination of message queues as well as Kubernetes to automatically scale out on demand and then scale back. And with that, quick journey through the system from the user's perspective. A user of the system typically starts with a set of files like these. On the left, you see a study protocol. On the right, you see a patient files. Typically, patient files come in JSON format, but it's hard to read, so we gave you a PDF representation for today. But you can imagine the sheer amount of data, especially if we're working with thousands of trial protocols, like on the left-hand side, and tens of thousands of patient files on the right-hand side. And this is the reason we decided to use the large language model pre-processing to condense the data we receive down to a standardized format, interpret it in the same way every single time, and reduce to the minimal information required for the task at hand, matching the patient. The user would then upload the data into our system, the extraction and matching tasks in the background, and the physician are running in the background, and the physician is left with a screen like this. A list of potential eligible patients for each trial protocol. Each patient with a clear eligibility status, ineligible if a inclusion or exclusion criteria is not met based on the patient data. Eligible if you found a unicorn that has all the right answers and all the correct data for all of the criteria that is listed in this particular trial, and the much more common case where the result is inconclusive. And we fully expect that. This usually means that nothing in the patient file hints at the patient not being ineligible yet. However, some criteria like recent lab results, pregnancy tests, things like that are time sensitive and critical, cannot be evaluated fully yet because either the data in the patient file is too old or missing, and the physician is then being asked by the system, we see that in a second, to add extra data into the system to complete the evaluation. So if you then select a patient, you are presented with a screen like this. And this is basically all the output from the three different models that I explained earlier. On the left-hand side, the physician sees the quote-unquote dumbed down inclusion criteria, and as well as the exclusion criteria. The system has an indicator for the automatic match, which then says either the AI evaluates the patient meeting or not meeting this criteria. The third column allows the physician to override the system, and then the fourth column provides the reasoning why the AI, based on the data that is presented to it, thinks that this is the right answer. The important aspect here is that this is a supportive system. We will never fully automate the selection of patients, and that's part of why I wanted to include this screen. The physician, the expert, whoever is working with the system, is always the quality assurance in our process, and always has the last say, can override the system and say, no, the patient is not eligible, or yes, the patient is eligible, despite you, as the AI, said it is not, and this is the reason why. All right. In summarizing our journey into enhancing clinical trial recruitment, and really the adoption of AI and large language models has fundamentally shifted how we, at least internally, but I think also our customers and partners, approach this critical process. We've seen firsthand the power of technology in boosting referral rates through pharmacists in our study, ensuring a deeper trust and a more diverse participation pool. The innovation is not about only meeting today's standards, but we heard that clinical trial recruiting gets more and more complex and more regulated. So it's also about anticipating tomorrow's challenges and making our recruitment efforts more efficient, inclusive, and adaptable. So as we look to the future, our focus remains on refining these technologies to further streamline and enhance the recruitment landscape. We're committed to making clinical trials more accessible and representative of all populations, and through that, giving us a more effective and equitable healthcare solution. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and I open the floor for questions.